Stop whatever you're doing and watch this video if CrowdStrike and Fortinet are in your mind. That is because you're probably already seeing some of the white papers and some of the marketing material about the integration of these two behemoths of the cybersecurity industry. But have you ever already seen a lab or work environment with these integrations? And do you actually know the use cases for integrating them? Well, in case this is a little foggy in your mind, this video right here is for you. So stop right there what you're doing. Take the time to listen with attention the guest for this particular video. Let's dive in. Thanks so much for joining me here today, John. Let's introduce yourself first, and then we'll get into the subject of the day. So tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Well, pleasure to be here, Andre. Hi, everyone. My name is John. I'm a senior solution architect here at NextGen, who's a cyber distributor across Australia and New Zealand, now part of the wider exclusive networks. And just here to help the channel understand more about some of the vendor integrations that might exist in their environment, what they might already have in their stack and they're not leveraging, just here to talk tech.
That's great, man. So when I first started at CrowdStrike, you were one of my people that I looked at, especially around expertise, because you're that good. So appreciate for that when I especially started. But now, of course, you're a beacon for all channel across New Zealand and Australia, like you said, and I appreciate your expertise. One of the things you work a lot at that I see across is your lab, right? So you help maintain a very special lab with very specific capabilities, right? And one of them is the subject of today's conversation.
Yeah, so we run a platform called the Cyber Lab, and what it gives us as, a distributor in the middle between all of these vendors and all of these partners is the unique vantage point of being able to see all of these technologies and how we might be able to bring them all together. And so today, what we're going to look at is integrating and looking at Fortinet and CrowdStrike. And so how do we bridge the gap between network and endpoint? How do we spread the visibility across the two platforms? How can we share some insights to affect the other platform and basically achieve a zero trust or a portion of the zero trust framework? And how can we get visibility on some of those unmanaged devices where we can't deploy a CrowdStrike agent, for example?
That's amazing, because you also touched on how we can bring the best of endpoint visibility from CrowdStrike plus network visibility from Fortinet, and you got this working cyber lab, right? So what can you show us? And by the way, I think you're the perfect person to take us through it, because you have access to both technologies, to both capabilities, and you worked on this integration yourself, right? So you can tell us a bit about the pain points and a bit of the configuration mishaps.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one because as people may or may not know, CrowdStrike is a cloud-based solution. The FortiGate would be an on-prem solution, for example. And so how do we sort of bring the data from your logs from your FortiGate up into the cloud? And how can, say, your posture from the CrowdStrike side of the house filter down to your Fortinet firewall? So I'll bring up our lab. And we'll start going through some of what we do. The integration is basically two parts. The zero trust assessment part, and then there's the CrowdStrike NextGen SIEM component. And we'll talk about each one in a bit of detail. If you're an existing CrowdStrike customer and you have NextGen AV and EDR turned on, what CrowdStrike can do is, based on your prevention policy settings in the CrowdStrike platform and your operating system level security settings on the endpoint, give you a score out of 100 that is now a zero trust score. And so if you have the best practices configured in the CrowdStrike platform, as in you have all the preventions turned on and everything set up to best practice, and you have the security settings in Windows turned on, like credential guard, app browser, isolation, all of that kind of good stuff, then you'll get a higher score out of 100. If you have things misconfigured, if you've turned something off, or you don't know what you're doing and someone's disabled a registry key, that risk score goes down.
And just a note on that, so the ZTNA score is from low trust all the way to 100 being to high trust. So yeah, that's a great tool for, of course, Fortinet, but every zero trust kind of assessment that you can integrate with. Yeah. Back to you, John.
Correct. Yeah. So, today we're talking about the Fortinet integration, but this score can be leveraged by multiple other third parties. So Okta, Netscope, they can all make use of that score. to affect the change on the access or the traffic side of the house. So to have a look at what your zero trust scores might look like, in the Falcon platform, if we were to log in, it'll live under host setup and management, and then zero trust assessment there. So you can see here, the average for our environment in the lab is 75 out of 100. You scroll down, you can see the individual scores, okay? So we've got some Fortinet devices over here, some with high zero trust scores, so sitting at 91, very good. But then we have some that are not so trusted, right? Sitting at 41 and 44. Now, you can, if you wanted to remediate this issue, you can click into that score and see where it's failing, right? Or where it's not failing. So in this case here, we failed this check, it's a low priority. There might be some that you are failing and they're a high or immediate priority to fix. But basically that column there, that overall assessment is what we're going with. So what we can do is we can now pivot to the Fortinet side of the house. We can add some tagging rules, right? So using the Fortinet endpoint management server, we can add some tagging rules that are unique to the CrowdStrike integration that say CrowdStrike number equals, below 65, give it a low tag. And we'll talk about what the tags mean in a second. Have a look at where you'd configure that. Go across to your Fortinet server. Once you've logged in, you'll go under security posture tags and you'll go to your tagging rules, okay? So you can see here, we've got two, one for high, one for low. Obviously you can create multiple. You can say if the tag doesn't exist at all, give it a score, and basically stop access if people don't have a ZTNA score, which means they might not have a CrowdStrike agent. But it's fairly straightforward, right? Give it a name, give it a tag, and then in the rule, this is where you can select if the CrowdStrike ZTNA, that's part of the dropdown, is higher than 75, we're going to give you a high tag, okay? Then we have our low tag, right? Which is if anyone is 65 or below, you get a low tag. Okay? And what happens is using the Fortinet platform, those tags can now be used by the firewall, right? So this is where we can now segment access based on these tags. So in the firewall, when we log in, and we'll have a quick look at that side as well, but just to explain it, in the firewall, we can say, if you have a tag that says low ZTA, you can now access, our on-prem SQL server, or you can't access M365 because we can't trust your device anymore, and we don't want you touching our sensitive or our crown jewels. So this is where you can kind of extend the reach of CrowdStrike, where it's protecting the endpoint, but it can't stop the access to, say, M365 in this case. You can use the firewall to just block all of that network connection to M365 and any of the Microsoft suites in general.
And as you connect there, the ZTA score is also something that is refreshed regularly on the endpoint. And what that means is these tags that you're leveraging out of Fortinet, for example, help you maintain some level of automation there in terms of your policies. So it keeps your policies dynamic as to the device state. So that's pretty helpful, right?
Absolutely. You want it to be dynamic so that when that host becomes a good member of the network, it can be allowed to do what it needs to do. So I've logged into one of our FortiGates in this environment. You can see here we have our policies, and we've labeled them as such, right? So ZTA and low score. And if we go have a look at one of these policies, you can see here the posture tag feature, right? So if it says high ZTA score, you can access these services, and that action is allow or accept. Whereas if we look at the low score, right, we're saying if you're a low score, these are sensitive destinations that we don't want you to access, and therefore we're tagging this as a deny, and we block the network traffic based on those tags. And so the intended action would be our trusted guy over here should be able to access Microsoft.com and Salesforce with no issues. Okay. Let's do Salesforce as well, just to test. As expected, it's a trusted device, it can do what it needs to do. And if we pivot across to our untrusted device, open our browser, right? You see here, if I try to refresh, if I try to log in, it won't let me through, but I do still have internet access, right? So there's no policy that says I can't go to the Netflix website, but it won't load either one of these. This is a demo environment, and it's just going to say site can't be reached, but you can redirect it to a page that will, that you host or that the firewall can return to the browser and say, with your logo and your corporate details, or an explanation as to why it didn't load. You see here, Microsoft didn't load because it got blocked, and the same behavior for the Salesforce piece as well. You can also check the tag of the device, of the host on the device as well. So you can see here down the bottom, we've got CrowdStrike running, and we've got the Forti client running as well. So when you load the Forti client, you click on your little profile icon, show you the score or the tag that's being assigned to this device. And so if you think something's up and you dig into this and you have a look, you probably call your admins and be like, what's wrong with my device? Give them the host name. They'll look up the ZTNA score and figure out what's wrong and how to fix it.
That's awesome. Yeah, for easy troubleshooting or easy check for the user as well. That's really good.
Yeah, really handy.
So that's the first
one.
Yeah, that's the first use case, right? So this is zero trust. This is bringing endpoint information, pushing dynamic policies through network policies through Fortinet. But you got more, right?
Yeah. So we've got one more. So the next one is the NextGen SIEM piece to this puzzle. And so NextGen SIEM is designed to be, your one-stop shop for your SOC SIEM needs or your security product needs. And so the idea is keep the CrowdStrike telemetry in the platform. It's it's the generator of the most of the data, and so there's no need to take it out and put it back in and get stuck in ingest and egress points and all that. But bring the third-party security products to the platform, and we can kind of stitch together detection from endpoint, cloud, identity, and any of those third parties that you plug into the platform, and enrich those detections. So that you, as a SOC analyst or a defender, can kind of get a fuller picture of what's happening rather than logging into multiple different products and trying to stitch together the issue yourself. All right, so have a look at how it works on the NextGen SIEM side of the house. Obviously, there's a bit more tweaking and a bit more to set up than how easy it was to do the zero trust piece. And so, first step is we need to get the data into NextGen SIEM, okay? And because, like we said, the firewalls might be on-prem, and this is a cloud product, we need to deploy some log collectors. So what we do is we go to NextGen SIEM, then we go to our data onboarding section.
Now, for anyone watching my channel, they might be familiar with my previous SIEM series, which was on Sentinel back in the days. So I did a whole series on how to onboard data on Sentinel. So this is akin to it, but of course, the CrowdStrike flavor of it. So absolutely bringing in data through data connectors. So yeah, go on, John.
No, awesome. So we need two parts. We need a data connector, which is basically going to sit in NextGen SIEM and listen for the data coming in. And then we need to deploy a log collector that's going to push that data into NextGen SIEM. Yep. So to do that, you'll go add connection. You'll find Fortinet in this long list of approved or supported devices. Right. There is an NDR one for cloud, but that's not the one we're focusing on today. We're going to do the FortiGate data connector. So the data connector part will live in the cloud in NextGen SIEM. The log collector I have deployed in a virtual machine in the environment.
Yep.
It's a very lightweight kind of just listener. It listens to the port that you're telling it to listen to for the logs coming in, and then just push straight out the other end. It doesn't need too many resources.
Cool.
This data connector is the listening side of the house. You just give it a name. Say, yep, I'm going to use the FortiGate parser. So one of the benefits of using something like this is it'll normalize the data as it gets ingested, right? So you don't have to worry about, how do I match this data type with this data type? The parser, in this case, that's already made for you, will normalize that data so that when you run a query, it's the same across your all your other third parties that you bring in. You accept the terms and conditions, and then you create the connection. Now, I'm not going to create this connection, but we're going to look at one that we have created. So here I have my data connector for the FortiGate. Okay, I have a connection ID. I have a URL that I'm forwarding the logs to. Yeah. So once the data connector is created, we grab the URL and the connection ID, save them somewhere because we're going to need them in the config for the log collector. So we've got the cloud piece set up. Now we've got to go deploy the on-prem log collector to start pushing the logs into the platform. Easiest way to do this is using the fleet management option. Okay. What this does is allow you from the cloud to manage and deploy your log collectors in a very easy fashion. You can manage them, upgrade them, downgrade them, do all of that kind of stuff. What happens is create a config. Okay, so in this case, I have my Fortinet CrowdStrike config, or you can click new config. But the config is pretty straightforward, right? It's where is the source coming from? So in this case, these are the ports that we've configured on the FortiGate to send the syslog logs that the FortiGate is generating. And then where do we want to send them, right? So that's the data from the log from the data connector. Okay, so when you create the data connector, it gives you a token and a URL. And you put that into your config, right? Source, where's the data coming from, and then where does it need to send it to? Right? Pretty straightforward. Once you've done your config and there's no errors, you save that, you publish it, and you go to your enrollment tokens. Okay, so we'll talk about why the enrollment token is important. But basically, what you do is you give it a name, you tie it to your config, and then it creates a token, right? Why that token is important is this is how you enroll your log collector to pull this config file down and know where it needs to send the data. From an admin perspective, it's easier because all you need to do now is if you need to make a change to the config, you just change it here, publish it, and the log collector gets the new file. You don't need to keep remoting in and transferring files and doing all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. Enrollment tokens also make it easy when you push down through fleet overview, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So when you go to fleet overview, now that you have your config and your token, you go get log scale collector, choose the OS that you're going to deploy it to, and then choose the token that you just created. Okay? So you can see here, as you change token, some of this data changes. What this does is you basically just copy this entire thing. It'll download the log collector, install it, and register it with the right config file to push the data into the right bucket. Right? Easy peasy. Once it's in there, you'll see it'll light up active. You'll see the data that it's ingesting. And now that data is searchable in the CrowdStrike platform, ready to be used. You can use it to trigger on correlation rules. You can use it for your own query and your own threat hunting, and you can use it across incidents and other third-party detections. And
that's where rules will come into a big play, right? Rule templates specifically.
Yeah. So part of the data connector is you get a bunch of dashboards to help you understand the data that you're ingesting. So if you do a search for Fortinet, for example, here is some of the data that you can look into. So if we go...
So dashboards are not even leveraging necessary rule templates yet, but they are just make it easy for you to consume as a SOC, right? So that they help your mean time to detect, if you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole thing behind NextGen SIEM is lowering that mean time to detect, mean time to respond.
Yep.
So you can see here, we've got two firewalls. Here's the amount of data or throughput that they're sending. We can see some of the rules being triggered. So you can set up correlation rules that say hit, an IOC that we have from CrowdStrike Threat Intelligence, or if they hit another correlation rule that we've created, you can see a quick summary of them here. And then you can drill into some network-specific data points if you so please. Okay. Then we move into a couple other things. So one of the primary dashboards I really wanted to touch on real quick is your reference dashboard, right? So this is provided inside the console. What's unique about this dashboard is it is designed to query every data source that you're ingesting. Okay. So what that means is it makes things like IOC hunting quite easy. You can say, okay, I know I've got CrowdStrike on my endpoints, but I don't know what else in my network is talking to, a malicious IP or a malicious domain or something like that. So you can say, show me anything across any log source that triggers a indicator of compromise. Okay? So you can see here, we've got some from CrowdStrike, we've got some from Fortinet, and we've got some from Okta as well. Okay. And that's not me having to write a long query and run it. I just chose the confidence level and then clicked apply, and it did the search for me. Okay? So again, keeping an eye on the visibility side of the house from all of the other third parties and what else is happening where you don't have a CrowdStrike agent or CrowdStrike product monitoring, this is how we can bring it all together.
Yeah, and you called out a few new things as well in there, which is the IOC integration with third-party logs, which is pretty exciting. That's great stuff.
So you can see here, we've got a bunch of correlation rules that are getting triggered. So something on the network is being very chatty, hitting a indicator of compromise, an IP address that is an indicator of compromise. And so when we have a bunch of detections that are, have a common entity or have a common method to stitch them together, we end up with what's called an incident. We have a look at our incidents. We've got one here, predominantly from an endpoint perspective. There might be some additional information that we can leverage. So what we can see here is we've got a detection where we've got a bunch of stuff happening on the endpoint side of the house. We have an identity in the middle here, running a bunch of malicious PowerShell, reverse shells, etc. from this endpoint over here, this desktop. What's unique is that this desktop and this untrusted device on the network have been speaking to the same IP address that might be where the initial compromise came from. And so if we hover over that node, we can see we've got some enrichment here, so we can add some enrichment if there's anything to tell us more about this IP. If not, that's fine. But what we can do is we can click on the IP address. We know that it's malicious because both of these devices are talking to it, and that's what triggered this incident. What we can use is we can use our workflow. If I click this execute workflow button over here, you can see it's on demand. And what it's going to do, it's going to ask me for an IP address and a name to give that IP address. And once it executes, it'll create that IP address object on the firewall and then add it to a block list and then add it to the quarantine list as well. So if I copy and paste that in there, that for example, and go execute now, that'll go off and run. You can watch the execution.
Yep. So you're helping MTTR, mean time to respond, and you're pushing out changes to FortiGate from CrowdStrike, which is really exciting, right?
Yeah, and the way it works in the back end is there's a group of CrowdStrike endpoints that are on the network that we designate as the closest to the firewall to make those changes, and they have the credentials to be able to go make changes on that device. So what we should see is this ping eventually timing out once that execution is completed.
So John, thanks so much for your time. I'm sure this is going to stop soon, but thanks so much for your time. And any last words?
No. I hope this was useful. It's always fun working with these integrations, and let us know what you think.
So what do you think of this? Well, write down in the comments if you are interested in more use cases or other integrations. I'm particularly interested in Zscaler, Netscope, other vendors like this, Mimecast, Proofpoint, and how they integrate well with CrowdStrike. And I'm probably gonna try to get some of these guests to talk about them. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments, leave a like, and please subscribe to at least help me and help grow the channel. Well, see you next time.